Chapter 17. I now fell into a regular routine of apprenticeship life, which was varied beyond the limits of the village and the marshes by no more remarkable circumstance than the arrival of my birthday and my paying another visit to Miss Havisham. I found Miss Sarah Pocket still on duty at the gate. I found Miss Havisham just as I had left her, and she spoke of Estella in the very same way, if not in the very same words. The interview lasted but a few minutes, and she gave me a guinea when I was going and told me to come again on my next birthday. I may mention at once that this became an annual custom. I tried to decline taking the guinea on the first occasion, but that was no better effect than she very angrily asked me if I expected more. So I took it. So unchanging was the dull old house, the yellow light in the darkened room, the faded spectre in the chair by the dressing-table glass, that I felt as if the stopping of the clocks had stopped time in that mysterious place, and while I and everything else outside it grew older, it stood still. Daylight never entered at the house as to my thoughts and remembrances, any more than as to the actual fact. It bewildered me, and under its influence I continued at heart to hate my trade and be ashamed of home. Imperceptibly, I became conscious of a change in Biddy, however. Her shoes came up at the heel. Her hair grew brighter and neat. Her hands were always clean. She was not beautiful. She was common and couldn't be like Estella. But she was pleasant and wholesome and sweet-tempered. She had not been with us more than a year. I remember her being newly out of mourning at the time it struck me, when I observed to myself one evening that she had curiously thoughtful and attentive eyes that were very pretty and very good. It came of my lifting up of my own eyes from a task I was poring at, writing some passages from a book to improve myself in two ways at once by a sort of stratagem. And seeing Biddy observant of what I was about, I laid down my pen, and Biddy stopped in her needlework without laying it down. "Biddy," said I, "how do you manage it? Either I'm very stupid, or you are very clever." "What is it that I manage, I'd like to know?" murmured Biddy, smiling. She managed our whole domestic life, and wonderfully too, but it wasn't that I was thinking about. And that made what I did think about even more surprising. "How do you manage, Biddy," said I, "to learn everything that I learn and keep up always with me?" I was beginning to be rather vain of my knowledge, for I spent my birthday guineas on it, and set aside the greater part of my pocket money for similar investment, though I have no doubt now that the little I knew was extremely dear at the price. "I might as well ask you," said Biddy, "how do you manage it?" "No, because when I come home from the forge at night, anyone can see me turning to at it. But you never turn to at it, Biddy." "Well, I suppose I must catch it, like a cough," Biddy said quietly, and went on with her sewing. Pursuing my ideas, I leaned back in my wooden chair and looked at Biddy sewing away with her head on one side. I began to think her rather an extraordinary girl, for I called to mind now that she was equally accomplished in the terms of our trade and the names of our different sorts of works and our various tools. In short, whatever I knew, Biddy knew. Theoretically, she was already as good a blacksmith as I, or better. "You're one of those, Biddy," said I, "who make the most of every chance. You never had a chance before you came here, and see how improved you are." Biddy looked at me for an instant and went on with her sewing. "I was your first teacher, though, wasn't I?" she said as she sewed. "Biddy," I exclaimed in amazement, "why are you crying?" "No, I am not," said Biddy, looking up and laughing. "Whatever put that into your head?" What could have put it into my head but the glistening of a tear as it dropped on her work? I sat silent, recalling what a drudge she had been until Mr. Wopsle's great-aunt successfully overcame that bad habit of living, so desirably to be got rid of by some people. I recalled the hopeless circumstances by which she had been surrounded in that miserable little shop and the miserable noisy evening school, with that miserable old bundle of incompetence always to be dragged and shouldered. I reflected that even in those unwonted times there must have been latent in Biddy what was now developing, for in my first uneasiness and discontent I had turned to her for help, as a matter of course. Biddy sat quickly sewing, shedding no more tears, and when I looked at her and thought all about it, it occurred to me that perhaps I had not been sufficiently grateful to Biddy. I might have had, too, received so much from her. I should have patronized her more, though I didn't use the precise word in my meditations. I should have brought her into my confidence. "Yes, Biddy," I observed, when I had done turning it over. "You were my first teacher, and that at a time when we little thought of ever being together like this in this kitchen." "Ah, poor thing," she replied. It was like her self-forgetfulness to transfer the remark to my sister and to get up and be busy about her, making her more comfortable. "That's sadly true." "Well," said I, "we must talk together a little more, as we used to, and I must consult you a little more, as I used to. Let us have a quick walk on the marshes next Sunday, Biddy, and a long chat." My sister was never left alone now, but Joe more than readily undertook the care of her on that Sunday afternoon, and Biddy and I went out together. It was summer-time and lovely weather. When we had passed the village and the churchyard and were out on the marshes and began to see the sails of the ships as they sailed on, I began to combine Miss Havisham and Estella with the project in my usual way. When we came to the riverbed and sat down on the bank, with the water rippling at our feet, making it all the more quiet than it would have been without that sound, I resolved that it was a good time and place for the admission of Biddy into my inner confidence. "Biddy," said I, after binding her to secrecy, "I want to be a gentleman." "Oh, I wouldn't if I was you," returned Biddy. "I don't think it would answer." "Biddy," I said with some severity, "I have particular reasons for wanting to be a gentleman." "You know best, Pip. But don't you think you're happy as you are now?" "Biddy," I exclaimed impatiently, "I am not at all happy as I am, and I am disgusted with my calling and my life. I have never taken to either since I was bound. Don't be absurd." "Was I absurd?" said Biddy, quietly raising her eyebrows. "I'm sorry for that. I didn't mean to be. I only want you to do well and to be comfortable." "Well then, understand once for all that I shall never, ever be comfortable, or could ever be anything else but miserable. There, Biddy, unless I can lead a very different sort of life from the life I lead now." "There's a pity," said Biddy, shaking her head with a sorrowful air. Now, I too had often thought it a pity, that in that singular kind of quarrel with myself which I was always carrying on, I was half inclined to shed tears of vexation and distress when Biddy gave utterance to her sentiment, and my own. I told her she was right. I knew it was much to be regretted, but still it was not to be helped. If I could have settled down, I said to Biddy, plucking up the short grass within reach, much as I had once upon a time pulled my feelings out of my hair and kicked them into the brewery wall, if I could have settled down and been half as fond of the forge as I was when I was little, I would have known much better it would have been much better for me. You and I and Joe would have wanted for nothing, and Joe and I perhaps would have gone partners. When I was out of my time, I might even have grown up to keep company with you, and we might have sat on this very bank on a fine Sunday, quite different people, and I should have been good enough for you, shouldn't I, Biddy? Biddy sighed as she looked at the ship sailing on and returned for an answer. Yes, I'm not over particular. It was scarcely flattering, but I knew well what she meant. Instead of that, said I, plucking up more grass and chewing it into a mash in my mouth, see as I am going on now, dissatisfied, uncomfortable, and what would it signify to me being coarse and common anyway, if nobody had told me so? Biddy turned her face suddenly towards mine and looked far more attentively at me than she had looked for a very long time. It was neither a very true nor a very polite thing to say, she remarked, directing her eyes to the ships again. Who said it? I was disconcerted, for I had broken away without quite knowing where I was going. It was not to be shuffled off now, however, and I answered, the beautiful young lady at Miss Havisham's, and she's more beautiful than anybody ever was, and I admire her dreadfully, and I want to be a gentleman on her account. Having made this lunatic confession, I began to throw up my torn-up grass into the river, as if I had some thoughts of following it. Do you want to be a gentleman to spite her or to gain her over? Biddy quietly asked me after a pause. I don't know, I moodily answered. Because if it is to spite her, Biddy pursued, I should think that you know best. That might be better and more independently done by caring nothing for her words. And if it is to gain her over, I should think, but you know best, that she's not worth gaining over. Exactly what I myself had thought many times. Exactly what was perfectly manifest to me at that moment. But how could I, a poor dazed lad, avoid that wonderful inconsistency into which the best and wisest of men fall every day? It may be all quite true, said I to Biddy, but I admire her dreadfully. In short, I turned over on my face when I came out of that, and got a good grasp of the hair on each side of my head, and wrenched it well, all the while knowing the madness of my heart to be so very mad and misplaced that I was quite conscious it would have served my face right if I had lifted it up by my hair and knocked it against the pebbles as a punishment for belonging to such an idiot as me. Biddy was the wisest of girls, and she tried to reason no more with me. She put her hand, which was a comfortable hand, though roughened by work, upon my hands, one after another, and gently took them out of my hair. Then she softly patted my shoulder with a soothing way, while my face upon my sleeve I cried. Exactly as I had done in the brewery yard, and felt vaguely convinced that I was very much ill-used by somebody or by everybody, I can't say which. "I am very glad of one thing," said Biddy, "and that is that you have felt you could give me your confidence, Pip. And I am glad of another thing, and that is that of course you know you may depend upon my keeping it, and always so far deserving it. If your first teacher, dear, such a poor one, and so much in need of being taught herself, had been your teacher at the present time, she thinks she knows what lessons she would set. But it would be a hard one to learn. And you've got beyond her now. And it's of no use any more." So, with a quiet sigh for me, Biddy rose from the bank and said with a fresh and pleasant change of voice, "Shall we walk a little further? Or shall we go home?" "Biddy," I cried, getting up, putting my arm around her neck and giving her a kiss, "I shall always tell you everything." "Till you're a gentleman," said Biddy. "You know I never shall be, so that's always. Not that I have any occasion to tell you anything. You know it already, just as I told you the other night." "Ha!" said Biddy, quite in a whisper, as if she looked away at the ships, and then repeated with her former pleasant change, "Shall we walk a little further, or go home?" I said to Biddy we would walk a little further, and so we did. And the summer afternoon toned down into summer evening, and it was very beautiful. I began to consider whether I was not more naturally and wholesomely situated, after all, in these circumstances, than playing beggar my neighbour by candlelight in the room with stopped clocks and being despised by Estella. I thought it would be very good for me if I could get her out of my head with all the rest of the remembrances and fancies, and could go to work determined with relish to do what I had to do, and to stick to it and make the best of it. I asked myself the question whether I didn't surely know that if Estella were beside me at that moment instead of Biddy, she would make me miserable. I was obliged to admit that I did know it for certainty, and I said to myself, "Pip, what a fool you are." We talked a good deal as we walked, and at that Biddy seemed to be right. Never insulting, never capricious, but Biddy today and somebody else tomorrow. She would have derived only pain and no pleasure from giving me pain. She would far rather have wounded her own breast than mine. How could it be, then, that I did not like her much better of the two? "Biddy," said I when we were walking homeward, "I wish you could put me right." "I wish I could," said Biddy. "If only I could get myself to fall in love with you. You don't mind me speaking so openly to such an old acquaintance?" "Oh dear, not at all," said Biddy. "Don't mind me. If I could only get myself to do it, that would be the thing for me." "But you never will, you see, Pip," she said. It didn't quite appear so unlikely to me that evening as it would have done if we had discussed it a few hours before. I therefore observed that I was not quite sure of that, but Biddy said she was, and said it so decisively, in my heart I believed her to be right, and yet I took it rather ill that she should be so positive on the point. When we came near the churchyard, we had to cross an embankment and get over a stile near a sluice gate, and there started up from the gate, or from the rushes, or from the ooze, which was quite in his stagnant way, old Orlick. "Hullo!" he growled. "Where are you two going?" "Where should we be going but home?" "Well then," said he, "I'm jiggered if I won't see you home." The penalty of being jiggered was a favourite malign suggestion of his. He attached no definite meaning to the word that I am aware of it, but he used it like his own pretended Christian name to affront mankind and convey an idea of something savagely damaging. When I was younger, I had had a great belief that if he had jiggered me personally, I had a great belief that he would have done so with a sharp and twisted hook. Biddy was much against his going with us and said to me in a whisper, "Don't let him come. I don't like him." As I did not like him, I took the liberty of saying we thanked him, but we didn't want seeing home. He received that part of information with a yell of laughter and dropped back, but slouching came after us at a little distance. Curious to know whether Biddy suspected him of having had a hand in that murderous attack of which my sister had never been able to give any account, I asked her why she did not like him. "Oh," she replied, glancing over her shoulder as he slouched after us, "because I'm afraid he likes me." "Did he ever tell you he liked you?" I asked indignantly. "No," said Biddy, glancing over her shoulder again. "He never told me so, but he dances at me when he catches my eye." However novel and peculiar this testimony of attachment, I did not think the accuracy of my interpretation was wrong. I was so very hot indeed, I was so angry with old Orlick daring to admire her, as hot as if it were an outrage upon myself. "But it makes no difference to you, you know," said Biddy calmly. "No, Biddy, it makes no difference to me. Only I don't like it. I don't approve of it." "Neither do I," said Biddy. "But that makes no difference to you." "Exactly," said I. "But I must tell you I should have no opinion of you, Biddy, if he danced at you with your consent." I kept an eye on Orlick after that night, and whether the circumstances were favourable to his dancing Biddy got before him, so I could obscure that demonstration. He had struck root in Joe's establishment by reason of my sister's sudden fancy to him, or I should have tried to get him dismissed. He quite understood and reciprocated with my good intentions, as I had further to know hereafter. And now, because my mind was not confused enough before, I complicated its confusion 50,000-fold by having states and sessions when I was clear that Biddy was immeasurably better than Estella, and that the plain, honest, working life to which I had been born had nothing in it to be ashamed of, but offered me sufficient means of self-respect and happiness. At those times I would decide conclusively that my disaffection to dear old Joe and the forge was gone, and that I was growing up in a fair way to be partners with Joe and keep my company with Biddy, when all in a moment one confoundedly remembrance of the Havisham days would fall upon me like a destructive missile and scatter my wits again. Scattered wits take a long time picking up, and often, before I had got them well together, they would be displaced in all directions by one stray thought that perhaps after all Miss Havisham was going to make my fortune when my time was out. If my time had run out, it would have left me still at the height of my perplexities, I dare say. But it never did run out, because it was brought to a premature end, as I now proceed to relate.